Hello and welcome to episode 99 of the Accountant Success Secrets podcast. Each week, this is 98, I'm sorry. Damn. Just that again. Oh, we can't. Oh, well.
No.
Never done that before. Goodness me. This is episode 98 of the Accountant Success Secrets podcast, just as well it's April the 1st. Each week, we talk with an accountant whose journey we hope will inspire others in practice. I'm one of your co-hosts, Mark Lee. I also run the Sole Practice Club, and I'm a mentor for sole practitioner accountants.
Yeah. Mark, I think this is going to go on throughout this episode. You did promise me a few surprises, and there we are, the first one. And all things are starting to go wrong even now. But anyway, I'm here, so don't worry, everybody. So I'm Philippa Haynes, brand and marketing support for accountants and bookkeepers, helping you to stand out for all the right reasons.
Our interviewees all have different backgrounds, different reasons for setting up their practice, different experiences along the way, and different ambitions.
Yes, that's right. So we explore their personal stories, starting with why and how they started their firm, the highs, the lows, and the lessons that they've learned.
Our aim is to identify what makes them tick and to highlight useful insights and secrets that you can apply straight away.
Yeah, if you would like to share your story in a future episode, please do get in touch with us.
Now, today's guest, Alexis Kingsbury, runs an accountancy practice that has 11 team members. Normally, our interviewees have run their practice for at least 5 years. Alex has been running his for a little over 5 weeks. The idea to start his firm came from a conversation at Accountex in 2025, less than a year ago. And having read his new book, I can assure listeners that you are in for a treat, however different this interview may be to those we normally conduct. Alexis' background in the profession is limited to helping accounting firms build better management practices. So why are we interviewing this relative accounting novice on our podcast? Well, it's because Alexis has done something unique. And when I tell you what it is, you may think that this is an April Fool because we're recording this on April the 1st. And I admit that is why I chose today to interview Alexis. But everything you're going to hear is true and, I hope you'll agree, inspiring as regards to future for smaller accounting practices. What has he done? Well, his firm Accrual Intentions is the world's first 100% AI accountancy practice. Yep, other than Alexis, every member of the firm is an AI bot. And having read about his experiences on LinkedIn and in his book, Accrual Intentions, I'm sure there are lessons which our listeners will value. Having said that, I also accept that today's interview will be unlike any other we have done, especially as I didn't let Philippa in on the nature of Alexis' AI firm before we started recording.
I'm feeling very scared. I'm very scared. And I'm just going to sit back and watch this unfold. So over to you, Mark.
Well, you could just, it's all there for you, Philippa.
Yeah. Apparently, you reminded me ages ago that anyone can call themselves an accountant. So, as you're running an accounting firm, you are a legitimate guest on our podcast, says she after it has all been done. I want to hear all about how the firm was created and how it all works. And on this occasion, the crossover lessons that will interest and benefit our listeners. Thank you, Mark, for that prompt.
Yes. Welcome, Alexis. Is there anything else you want to say by way of intro at this stage?
That's an amazing introduction, and thank you so much for welcoming me on the podcast. And apologies to Philippa for being involved in this April Fool setup. But you're quite right that as I have attended many accountancy events over the years, I've been told numerous times that, did you know, technically anyone could call themselves an accountant just by doing accounts, just by starting to do those things. And within a business, you don't even need to have some of the things that you need to have it as an external firm practicing. And even as a practicing accountant with your own firm having clients, the requirements on actually doing that are very limited. And so I knew that going in when I was doing the experiment, that it's kind of, well, let's see how far we can test this. I'm neither have a background as an accountant, apart from doing my own finances, etc., in my own businesses, of which I've got a few. Nor do I particularly want to train as an accountant. So I largely wanted to heavily leverage my 100% AI team to do so instead. So it's definitely yielded some interesting lessons, and I'm looking forward to sharing that with you.
Thank you ever so much. But before we go any further, we must thank the sponsor of our podcast, Pinnacle Global Group, the trusted offshoring partner to over 150 accounting and bookkeeping firms across the UK and Ireland, led by London-based chartered accountant Mayank Pandya.
Yeah, and they have offices in London and Mumbai. Well, that's what I think they have. And a team of over 300 professionals. Pinnacle provides both compliance resourcing from accountants, bookkeepers, and payroll admins to tax and audit associates. Also, value-added support, including management accountants, virtual finance controllers, financial analysts, and more. And of course, they're GDPR compliant, ISO certified, covered by professional indemnity insurance, and they offer flexible models, full-time, part-time, or pay as you go. You can even start with a trial period or join their sponsored trip to Mumbai to meet the rest of the team in person. So to find out more, please go to www.pinnacleoss.co.uk or click the link wherever you're listening to this podcast.
And just to assure you, Philippa, I haven't messed up the script at all.
Fabulous.
I did something that you weren't aware of until seconds before we got to them. But I'm not changing anything else, don't worry.
Marvellous.
Also, Woods knocks over a banner. Never mind. Also supporting the podcast is the Tax Advice Network. Their website enables accountants to choose specific specialist tax advisors for general tax support or for help across any of over 100 areas of tax. It's free to use. You just pay the tax advisor that you choose after agreeing terms with them, whether for ad hoc advice or for a regular tax clinic type support service for your practice. Go take a look at their website, find a taxadvisor.online, where you can also register to get their weekly tax tips, which are written especially for general practitioner accountants.
Yeah, and before we finally start the interview, a quick reminder that you can support the podcast and get exclusive bonus content by subscribing on Patreon.
Just download the Patreon app, subscribe, and you'll get the bonus episodes through your usual podcast player. Details are in the show notes, or ask me or Philippa if you're not sure.
Right, let's get back to Alexis then. As you know, we aim to keep the podcast to around 30 minutes, and we normally do that by focusing on a few key questions. But I guess that our questions will be slightly different today, if I'm right.
Indeed. Well, let's go back to the start, Alexis. Why did you decide to set up your AI accountancy practice, and how did you do it? And who's in this practice? Who are the team members? I've read the book, so I know the answers, but it seemed like the logical place to start.
Love that. Well, yeah. So the reason I did this was I was frustrated when at accountancy events, and Mark, we first met at one of the accountancy events, and I occasionally speak at these events and so on. But I would often see some version of the conversation around AI falling into two camps. One is it's so transformational, it's going to change everything. And, all accountancy and every industry is going to now be completely disrupted by AI. Oh, and it might take all our jobs. Oh, and it might then kill us all. And you kind of had this sort of, very hyped up version of what the potential is. And then people would say, okay, can you give me an example? And the examples of AI use would be drafting an email, recording a conversation, scanning an invoice, and it doesn't feel very sort of transformational and game-changing. And so then I think that's given breed to the opposite camp, which says this is a complete hype and a load of rubbish, and it's clearly not going to be this transformational. It's just a tool, and in many ways we've already started using it. Maybe we're using ChatGPT, maybe we're using Microsoft Copilot, or we're using AI as part of the existing tools, and therefore nothing really changes and we can just carry on. or even, and actually, I don't think this whole AI thing is very good for us anyway, and so on. So you kind of end up with these two camps. And what I felt quite strongly was that neither can be true. There must be some messy middle here. And so I wanted to work out, what does this actually look like? And I didn't want to work with our current AI functionality, etc., because I felt like the problem is that every time you learn a thing, a couple of weeks later there's another model release or whatever, and you just go, oh well, now it's all changed, of course. And it feels that sense of anxiety that you then have around it becomes very heightened. And I'm all about de-stressing your business, not making it more stressful. And so I thought, well, how could I just turn to the back page of this story? Like, where does all of this go? And then can I do an experiment that would allow me to see the end point? And then I could report back, particularly on what AI doesn't work for and will never work for, and therefore provide some reassurance to the industry, accountancy industry, but also professional services, indeed humanity at large. But equally provide some interesting insights on, okay, so but what does it work for both now and in the future? And so that was why I wanted to do this at all. And Mark, as you mentioned in the introduction, it came up first as an idea back in 2025 in about August, September. And I kind of did a bit of testing and set up a website and set up 11 team members, and you could talk to them via, each had their own custom GPT, so that you can, and in fact that's still the case at accrualintentions.com. You can go and meet the team and click on them and like chat to them, and they've all got their own like personalities and role titles and names and photos and so on. But largely when I did that, I kind of did a bit of that and was like, this is really interesting, it's taught me some stuff. And then I kind of put it away. And then after about 5 or 6 months, I was looking at my own usage of AI and said, this has completely changed. I need to repeat this experiment and go and take this further and go deeper. And it coincided with a period where I was like, oh, I'm a bit unwell, I can't be bothered to do real work, I'll mess about instead. And so that's what I did over the subsequent initially a day and then a couple of mornings, and then it kind of expanded over a few weeks. I started from scratch, I suppose. Although I took what I'd done back in September with the website and which included its vision and values and these 11 team members with each with their names and so on. And given my background in working with accountancy firms and sorting out their processes and their playbooks and so on, I basically took all of that and said, okay, let's build a firm. What does this need to look like? And got my AI managing partner, Grace Ledger, to lead and come up with, here's the plan. And then she tasked each AI team member with a work stream. And so you had Holly Culture, who's head of people and culture, running with that work stream. You've got Buzz Clickman, who's head of marketing, was incredibly frustrated that his work stream wasn't scheduled to start for 3 months, and made his opinion known on that. You had Reginald Rules, who was sorting out all of our compliance frameworks and so on. And so I kind of played a little bit of a game of, if you're familiar with the film and book, Yes Man, of just kind of going, what happens if I just keep on encouraging them and just saying, yes, go ahead, and see what do they create and what do we build and so on. So that's kind of where it started, and I can happily share then what happened next. But that was why I set it up.
I'm completely gobsmacked, really. But so I mean, I guess the question is, you've set it all up. Where has it gone, or what stage are you at? Is it working? Have you got clients coming? What's the situation?
Yeah, great question.
I'm laughing because it's a great question. I'm laughing because I've read the book, so I know. And by the way, the joke is really on me this week, because although you didn't know about this beforehand, Philippa, I've spent much longer preparing for this interview than any others, because I've read the intentions, partly because I couldn't put it down, partly because I just loved the concept, and partly because I think, as we'll discuss on the Patreons only supplement to the podcast, there are some real genuine lessons for accountants, which we'll delve into in more detail later when we get to that. But let's go back to you, Alexis' answer to your question there.
Yeah, so a great question, Philippa. So I suppose initially I started off just going, okay, let's build out what a normal accountancy firm looks like in terms of its processes, and actually to some extent in places it was best practice accountancy firm look like, because bear in mind that that's what I tend to do with practices, is things like, have you identified your ideal customer profile? Have you defined your services that you offer that's specific to that niche and the value that they offer? Have you then worked out what your client onboarding process should look like, and the steps that are involved in that, and how you make sure that the client is a good fit, but equally you're communicating the benefit? How are you then, getting them set up with all these things? So I was very much going, right, I'm going to take all my best practices. I was halfway through writing my other book, the accountancy playbooks, and arguably Accrual Intentions was just a big procrastination from writing that. But in that book, I'd laid out, okay, here's how, here's what best practice looks like for client onboarding, employee onboarding, and doing tax returns and all these sorts of things. And so I was using that as my kind of guide of, I need to set this up. But then I knew as well that none of this is worth anything unless it actually does some client accounts and does some real accounting work. So one of the first funny things that happened was that Grace Ledger happily said, well, that's going to be the first test, is we need to test the assumption of, can we do real work? And we concluded that the best way to do that would be to do, her suggestion was, we need to get that first client. It wasn't until I highlighted that, actually, wouldn't that be a breach of AML requirements? Like, if I don't register for anti-money laundering and then take my client through that, isn't that an offence? And Reginald Rose pipes up and goes, yes, and actually you could be imprisoned for it. So one of the chapters is, will Grace still run the firm if I'm in prison? And those sorts of problems, I think a lot of us are familiar with when working with AIs, hallucinations, things that are incorrect. But Grace was merrily excited to work with real clients. So I decided instead I'd work with my own accounts from my multiple businesses that I could test. And I started off with an easy one, where it's a sort of side business, small number of transactions, etc. But then when that was working, I then tested it with one of my main businesses with 7-figure revenues and thousands upon thousands of transactions in multiple currencies over the course of 15 years, and was surprised at how good the results were. And bear in mind, I was able to then compare it against what my real human accountant had been doing, and therefore able to both see where it got things right and wrong. But also, one of the starkest differences was how good it was at the customer service element of it. Because I had my other team members like Sunny Rapport, who's head of customer services, and Casey Caremore, who's head of client success, who were not just serving me the accounts or giving me the bookkeeping summary on how I should improve how we're doing bookkeeping, but were providing actual guidance that meant, as a business leader who is not properly an accountant, although is an accountant by running an accounting firm, that could actually understand it and could go and verify claims that they made, because it was able to say, well, go and have a look at, in your zero, you can go see this and you can compare it to that figure, and as a result, make sure it's correct. And that's something that many human accountants do not do for their clients. So I started doing that. And then I bumped into Ryan Piercy, who's a fellow of the ICAEW.
I know Ryan. Yeah.
Fantastic. Yeah. And so and we were at an event and we were chatting about it and having a bit of a giggle. And he said, well, but how do you know? How do you know it's good enough? And I said, well, I've done it on my accounts, but I know that's not a client. He said, you could do it on mine. And so I had to agree with him that on the express understanding this was a demo, not a real client engagement. I don't want to get Grace sending me to prison again. So we agreed that he would provide me the accounts. He said, this won't be easy because it's first year accounts. So you can't do the junior accountant trick of just copying last year's and updating it. And he said, it's a 13-month period and there's some complex shareholding stuff. And so I just like, let's see what Grace and the team can do. And so we ran the engagement as if it was real. He filled in the client discovery form. I provided that to the team. It was hilarious because the AI team then got overexcited and were like, "Oh my goodness, they're a fellow of the ICAEW, and like Ryan's gonna be a real test and whatever." And they instantly started making mistakes. Like in the first email to Ryan, there was a line, like as part of a generally really good email, there was a line that was kind of trying to flatter him, but it said, "You'll spot if we make any errors." And so Ryan, being Ryan, replied, and as part of his reply was like, "I hire you as my accountant to get things right. I'm not expecting that you put that on us." And he got a lovely, well thought out and professional apology from Sonny with support from Grace as well. But it's like we went through that entire journey, and Ryan got to a point where he described the results as because we went all the way through, including accounts and share certificates and board minutes and all these sorts of things. And he got to a point where he described it as scarily impressive, that the work done was better than that of like trainee accountants and better than quite a few qualified accountants that he's seen. And it completely changed his view on where AI and where the finance profession is going over the next 5 years.
I'm going to ask a really stupid question now. And I'm sure
there's no stupid questions in this area.
It shows me up for being not really knowing enough about it. But what sort of platform are you using in order for all of these kind of conversations to be going on and controlling? I have no clue what your dashboard looks like, or if you have one, or what's that look like?
That's not a stupid question at all. And it's one of the most common ones I get. And the short answer, which you won't like, and then I'll go into the full answer. The short answer is actually the technology didn't matter. During the experiment, I switched over onto different platforms in different ways. What mattered much more was what in the AI engineering space they would call harnessing or orchestration or whatever, or what we would call in just the business world processes and guidance and policies and your reference documents and all that kind of stuff. That was far more important than what model I used. And so throughout the experiment, I used I've used it in Claude, and I used it in both Claude Code at some points where I've got it in like a little multiple terminal windows and so on, and my entire desktop looked like I was something out of the Matrix. I used it in Claude Co-work, which is meant to be their kind of front-end UI to make all of that a bit more friendly. I was able to do it in OpenAI's Codex, which is their multi-agent agentic version of ChatGPT. And now, like if I was running it again, I could do it in Perplexity's computer. I could do it in Alibaba's new tool out there. Like there's many more tools now available for this.
But what about your team? Where are they all sitting?
The AI team members.
Yeah.
They're fictional virtual beings that are basically the creation of taking a document. So let's take if we go back to the kind of core on the website. If you go to see the team and you click on one of the team members, there's a custom GPT behind each one where that team member has got some files preloaded into the custom GPT. So custom GPT, basically, for those that aren't familiar, it's a chat GPT thing. The idea is that you, rather than just starting a conversation in a brand new chat window, you're doing it in something that has had some additional files and context given to it in advance, so that your very next question has got that context with it. Yeah. So if we take,
are you just having different? Do you have different pop-ups though coming as you're working through from the different members who are thinking about different things?
Not quite, and depends on the task that I'm doing. But essentially, if we take this just as this example, what you've essentially got with a custom GPT is they've got a set of files that are basically telling them who are they, what company do they work for, who is their customer, what's their role, their name, all of those things, who do they work with, and the rest of the team. So that was the starting point. Was you could then talk to them individually. But you're right. How do they then talk to each other? Well, in theory, what you could do is actually just copy and paste responses between those to kind of formulate a discussion, which I did back in like August, September. That's exactly what I was doing. And it's like, well, this is what Buzz says, and Holly says this. And I even got them having a performance review between each other, where Holly Culture was addressing Buzz Clickman's performance because we hadn't had any clients yet. And so I kind of set them up with, I think, with a phone and a laptop so that they could have this conversation and so on. However, in February, when I was running it with multi-agent agentic AI, where you're using things like Claude Code or Cowork or Codex or whatever, there I was able to set it up so that it's able to run them as like all within the same thing. So I didn't need to then have to do a load of copy and pasting. They could have that conversation, and it's blurred, right? Like there are blurred lines around this because, of course, sometimes they're just like it's the same thing, but they're just pretending. Sometimes they would spin off sub agents where they task them and set them as that person. So, for example, when Grace was saying, right, here's a work stream on the people work stream, it's then tasking, you are Holly, head of people and culture. Here's the work stream you need to work on. This is what you need to do. And here's your guidance. And so Holly then goes and does a load of things. And I'd written it in that I wanted them to capture the process they went through out loud as dialogue so that I could see in a human way how they were thinking and talking about this. And any interactions between team members the same. And it was that enabled me to turn it into a book where in the book you see the discussions between team members as they approach these various challenges.
That's at the end of each chapter. There's a great example I think you could probably share, Alexis, here about realizing that they didn't have to be doing things sequentially, or you didn't have to ask them to do one thing at a time. Something that you might have done an hour here, an hour there, or a minute here, a minute there. Was it a set of accounts or something?
Yeah. So there are numerous examples where I realized throughout the experiment that the biggest limiting factor was me, like my mindset, the extent to which I set scope and so on. And so, for example, most people, when you talk about AI, think something like ChatGPT or whatever. And so they're very familiar with, I use AI. I give it a file or I copy and paste a email I've had. And I say, right, draft me a reply. And then it drafts a reply, and then you say, no. We've already had the meeting. I need to arrange a follow-up meeting, and these were the topics. And you go back and forth, and eventually you end up with an email that's there or thereabouts. You copy it into your email provider, you make a few more edits, and you send. And then you ask yourself the question: did that save me time? And that's a hard one because with all the back and forth and the copying and pasting, maybe it didn't. Maybe it actually took longer than if you had written it yourself. But then would the quality have been good? Maybe it would have been. And it's hard to assess. And so you end up in this territory of thinking, oh, well, does AI just give me a 10, 20% efficiency saving? Or possibly not even that. And what I found was that actually, when you change your mindset around the scope, you don't say, write me an email. An example that I gave was, here is the email from Ryan, our test client. I've provided you with a folder with all of the exports that you said that you needed to run the process that you've designed for how we then work with a client on their accounts and so on. Go. And so rather than saying, right, now draft me an email, okay, now draft me a set of accounts, now do this, now do that, I set the really high objective and let it run. And it would run then for like 8 minutes. And I've heard people say, oh, but Claude Cowork, it's really slow. It's like you're using it in the wrong way. It's not about speed, it's about leverage. And so it would then run for like 8 minutes. And then I would have a file with, I remember one particular activity where it ran for about 8 to 10 minutes. And I got 108 deliverables with files that in total were 350 megabytes. Including, scenario planning spreadsheets and financial cash flow forecasting and all this kind of stuff with all formulas that cross-reference and all work. But it was able to do this really, really big thing rather than me operating in the minutiae of like, oh, can you change that cell to yellow or whatever, which would have been slower. And so that shift was one of the big things that I found through the experiment that enabled me to basically give the team, here's what the customer says, I'm off for a walk. and literally I'd come back to the dialogue. Right, Alexis is off for a walk. Come on, let's go, team.
I have to say, the book Accrual Intentions by Alexis, which sort of sets out exactly what he's done and how he's done it. And you see members of the team quote, talking, unquote, to each other is just astonishing and wonderful and glorious. Unfortunately, there was never going to be enough time to get through as much as I wanted to in this main interview or in the supplementary one. But we should probably finish this one with what lessons can you share from what you've learned here well, no, let's hold that for the Patreons bit, because I know there are some fascinating things, particularly coming out of the epilogue in the book. But I think there's a part of me that thought, if I was a sole practitioner accountant, like all my clients are, I wonder if I would be thinking, well, I don't have any staff. I don't want to recruit staff, but could I create a support team like Alex has done here? And I know somewhere in the book, there's a conclusion that there need to be at least 3 real people in a team. But given that sole practitioners without staff have traditionally worked quite happily without anybody else, it must still be possible to do that. But what would your thoughts be on sole practitioners thinking of doing that? Or what about those that have teams or they're looking to build teams?
Yeah, so in the book, one of the things that I talk about is a concern over, what does this mean for teams and large organizations and humanity and jobs at large and whatever. And so there's some talk about that. But if we instead focus on the sole practitioners, you're absolutely right. And in fact, in many cases, sole practitioners are better placed to leverage a lot of this than mid-sized and large firms, because they have less inertia, less politics, more willingness perhaps to experiment. And you can, as a result, start with just one process that you're already doing, rather than try and do the whole firm. And, you've got no team members to have to train and change management to have to implement. So my advice would be, start with a big process. So start process level rather than task level. And something that causes a problem. Because if you start with something that isn't that much of an issue, then you're not going to get the benefit. And one of the big things that you're going to need to invest in this is time. The good thing is that this stuff, unlike a lot of technologies in the past, doesn't cost a lot of money. It's not like in the days where you'd need supercomputers, and therefore you need to have space to put supercomputers, and each one's going to cost you tens of thousands of pounds and so on. Or in the days of electrical motors, where those cost hundreds of thousands, or and so on. This is an innovation, a technology that in relative terms is trivially expensive for the impact you can get, but it requires time. And so you have to focus on a particular process, and put the work is less technical than you might imagine. Instead, it becomes around what in AI engineering they'd call kind of harnessing. I would call process documentation and all that kind of stuff. So that in many ways, yes, you're a sole practitioner, and maybe you're a sole practitioner because you didn't want to manage people. Well, here's the news. You are now going to manage team members. They're just not going to be human, because a lot of the things that you would need to do when managing people now apply with AI. You need to be able to give them the job description. What is the expectation that you have for them? What's their role? What does good look like? What's the guardrails around what they are and aren't allowed to do for you? What's the process that you want them to go through? What are the steps that they need to take so that you've got visibility of that and that you can verify the work that they've done? Where are you the human in the loop? So what are you reviewing before it goes to client? All those sorts of things. So that becomes all valid, that you might, maybe some of you have avoided hiring for that. Well, I'm afraid that becomes even more important with hiring AI employees. And you don't need 11. You just start with one AI workflow, one role that you can carve out from what you're currently doing and build from there. But the mindset shift is the hardest part, because you're shifting from AI helps me do my job. So not even like, oh, I do my job. It's like AI helps me do my job. Most people are already there using ChatGPT, whatever. To instead, I design systems and processes so that AI can run on my behalf.
Yeah, that's a great way of summarizing it. And I'd also add, and I absolutely agree with this conclusion in your book, which sort of proves and takes further a lot of what I've been saying for a while. AI is not going to replace accountants. AI is going to help them shift what they do so that they're able to focus on the stuff that clients really value. And we'll come to this in the Patreon interview afterwards, the role of junior staff doesn't need to disappear. You just have to rethink what they can do and how they can learn in a different way to how my generation learned. You give the example of when calculators came in and we changed how we dealt with numbers. I've often talked about how when spreadsheets came in, that made big differences. The internet, Google search, AI is the same but different in that it need not mean that we don't need junior staff, but we need junior staff to do different things. Just as 25, 30 years ago, at the start of the self-assessment tax system, there was a lot of fear we'd get rid of a whole raft of junior staff in the same way that we got rid of a whole raft of paperwork. And it never happened. The roles evolved. And I think with a bit of foresight, and I would encourage accountants to read your book, a bit of insight, they won't be scared of the future either, and they'll be embracing it, because I think your book is quite inspirational in that way.
Thank you.
Philippa, do you want to any sort of final thoughts from you?
Well, I guess the overall message that is coming out of this is that we must not get in the way of ourselves.
Yeah.
That actually, we are capable of dreaming up these things, but there comes a point where, as you said, we become the obstacle. And going forward, the future is all about getting that balance right, isn't it? Between kind of creating the process, but doing it in such a way that you're able to sort of step away and go away, have that 10-minute break or whatever. And that's the really interesting point. So we're always going to be galloping against the clock, aren't we, really? And sort of having to do something, put something in place so that we don't become the bottleneck. And I think that is as humans, that's what always happens, isn't it? What I've been thinking about as we've gone through is that Dave Selleck would be a perfect person to speak to from Sidgrove, because he's designed his own kind of accountancy firm, hasn't he? Practice, whatever. But he does everything. He's a DJ, and he's set up everything so that he's got it all working. Kind of various. I don't know how much of the sort of AI is. It's not the same, but it would be a great conversation, I'm sure.
And Dave was our guest quite recently on the podcast.
He was.
Episode 93, and this is episode 98, so just a few weeks ago. Well, as we move towards the end of today's podcast, I'd remind everyone listening that Alexis' story is genuine. And if you doubted that at the start, I'm sure having listened to him, you are now in no doubt. We have been recording this on the morning of April the 1st, and the only April Fool here has been consciously played on Philippa, who had no warning about the rather different nature of this interview to usual. And unsurprisingly, you've coped brilliantly. Well done. Alexis, how can listeners find out more about you, your experiment, and your book, Accrual Intentions?
Yeah, thank you so much. And thanks for having me on the podcast. So to find out more about the experiment and the book, you can go to accrualintentions.com, where you can actually also get the first 3 chapters for free. So you can go check it out and see whether it's for you. In terms of finding out more about me and finding me on social media, etc., if you go to alexiskingsbury.com, there's a load of stuff there, including you can see videos and clips of me doing my thing when speaking. And also the other book that I'm working on, which is the Accountancy Playbooks. You can go to accountancyplaybooks.com, where you can sign up for the waitlist for when that book becomes available. But also on that page, there's a diagnostic that you can run to help you identify where in your practice is currently your weakest area. Where's the bottleneck that you perhaps need to shine the spotlight on, which is a really good place then to start in terms of then looking at where do you want to embed AI into your workflows as well.
Absolutely fantastic. Thank you. In our extra bonus interview, Patreon subscribers only, we'll ask you to share and expand on some of the insightful conclusions set out in the epilogue at the end of your book. Those really are valuable ideas that will both inspire accountants and prompt them, I think, to take some easy actions to be better prepared for the future, and maybe even to follow your lead with adopting AI colleagues. Before that, Philippa, how can listeners find out more about you?
Well, I'm just about alive. You can find me on LinkedIn in the next few days just to see how I am. I think I'm all about brand and marketing, so if you want support there. But as you can see, good at thinking on my feet as well. Very good in a crisis. What about you, Mark?
Well, online everywhere. My business, my domain name is bookmarklee.co.uk. My business card is a bookmark. On LinkedIn, Mark Lee FCA. I'm all about helping sole practitioner accountants to feel more confident about their practice, because I know that running a practice alone can feel lonely, even when things look fine. If you want clarity, better clients, calmer days, always happy to have a talk, no pressure ever. And do please connect with both Philippa and me on LinkedIn, and follow the podcast on LinkedIn, Facebook, and Patreon.
Indeed. Sadly, that's all we have time for today, but thank you very much, Alexis, I think. Our thanks go to the sponsors of the podcast, Pinnacle Global Group, your trusted outsourcing partner. I'm sure they're delighted with the high-tech version we have today. So check out their website, let their CEO, Mike, know how you heard about the podcast, and let them know also how inspiring it's been.
Yeah. Thanks to the Tax Advice Network, the easiest way for accountants to reach specialist tax advisors. Remember, there's no charge for using the website findataxadvisor.online, where you can also access weekly tax tips written especially for general practitioner accountants.
Yeah. If you've enjoyed this episode, please subscribe, share, and leave a view on Apple, Spotify, or what was the other one? YouTube. That's it. It makes a real difference.
Our guest next week on episode 99 will be Hannah Miller. Please get in touch with Philippa or me if you'd like to be interviewed on the podcast in May.
Yeah, before then, we're going to get further insights from Alexis for our Patreon subscribers. So please head over to our Patreon page, which is patreon.com/accountants success secret singular. That's where you'll hear about the biggest challenges currently facing Alexis and his approach to them. We also ask guests to talk about how they're integrating AI, but of course we don't need to, because that has been the whole subject here. But we're going to get some more information, which I'm sure is going to be amazing.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I remember to edit everything except that bit.
That's all right. It's okay.
Sorry. Otherwise, until next week on the podcast or anywhere else we might meet online or in real life. Bye-bye for now.
Bye.
Bye.